Welcome, everybody. Thanks for showing up on time here. Let's see, just making sure this is set up right here. All right, so so we'll be covering two-part analysis verbal. And yeah, a little bit about me. I've been a full-time GMAT specialist since 2016. Have taken the GMAT 5 times, scoring all 99%, and actually with the help of TTP in 2020, helped me get up to 780. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. So encourage questions from you. And but let's try to keep it a bit on topic during most of the session. If there's any questions about me or about the LiveTeach class up front, we can answer those now. And then during the session about the two-part analysis verbal, any strategies or clarification, because I know I do talk a little bit fast to try and cover as much as we can. And then finally, at the end, I do want to open it up a little bit to general questions. So yeah, and then one announcement there about the LiveTeach. So this will be my 7th cohort. I've been doing it the past year and a half for TTP. Been really fun helping everybody break through their obstacles, get their score as fast as possible, because it is a really big challenge. You know, this GMAT, right? Everybody's trying for that top few percentile for the most part. And so I'll put in the chat here, I got a cohort coming up here. It's going to be Mondays and Wednesdays starting on this week on Wednesday. So Wednesday, August 7th through October 14. It's going to be 40 hours, 10 weeks. And that'll be at 8 Eastern, 8 to 10 Eastern, Mondays and Wednesdays. So I got the link there in the chat, but want to make the most of your time. So let's dive in. So I'm going to screen share here, one sec. All right, so I did want to get, a lot of times people are unsure about the, so a few details about the data insights. So I wanted to cover that. Real quick, I'm going to pop out the chat for questions. We will be doing a poll later for actually going through questions together. Yeah, so, all right, let's take a look here. So one note is that a lot of people aren't aware is data insights is objectively the hardest in terms of an average score is significantly lower than the other sections we see here, 74.5. That's actually a good thing though, because it means that like for a certain, even if you're already at like a 90 percentile, right, there's still 9 more points you can possibly improve, right? Whereas say on verbal, if you're at 84, so there's maybe only 6 more points. So the way you want to think about it is every 3 points up will give you 20 points on your score. So like, let's say you're here at 75, you got up to, you know, an 84, right? 9 points up, that's going to be every 3 points is worth 20. So that's going to be 60 points up on your total score. Another thing people aren't aware of is on the actual test for data insights, it's a little bit different than the practice test. You will see 8 data sufficiency and only 3 multi-source reasoning, whereas there's 3 or 6 on the practice test. So that can affect the pacing a bit, where it's a bit harder on the practice test if you end up with 6 multi-source, because they are these very dense with 2 or 3 tabs. Normally 2 table analysis, 3 graphics, and then for what we're covering today, the 2-part analysis verbal, normally 2 quant and 2 verbal. So you know, there is only, you know for sure you're going to have 2 verbal, 2-part analysis. A lot of times people do find these tricky, so wanted to cover that today. And then on the actual verbal section, most of the 2-part analysis will be similar to a critical reasoning and reading comp. We'll see some examples of that. There can throw in a couple other question types that we'll also look at, which is order-based logic and criteria, occasionally something very miscellaneous. But for the main in terms of the structure of the course with TTP and what we recommend is really, in general, mastering the quant and the verbal first before data insights, because a lot of those skills will apply. However, for today, we did want to give you an overview of it and seeing how it connects to the other topics. And one big important thing is you do not get partial credit. So essentially, if say you were 70% on each part and it's 2-part analysis, right, you have to get both parts. So therefore, that drags you down to only 49% accurate overall. So that is an important factor. You do have to be super careful. And on many of the other question types, you might have even 3 parts where, you know, if you were even at 80%, that would still drag you down to like 50%. So on each part. Right. So we'll start with a quick example on order-based logic. So we want to start with the strictest constraint. So I'll show you what we mean here on the right. And then grid width we know in stages. So, okay, social studies must be scheduled on Friday. This is a very basic example. We see here we have social studies, history, math, science, and art. One thing just on all question types that are somewhat, you know, writing things down, especially quant, but also here, we want to be careful with like SS versus SC, right? Social studies versus science, not mixing them up. A common quant thing is maybe you have 3 different prices. You might have an original, you know, a sale price and a discount price. So you don't want to be careful with that. Or you might have, you know, price 1, quantity 1, price 2, quantity 2, something like that. The subscript can be helpful. So just a note on notation there, really important, being careful with all that. And basically anything that can be backwards is like the most common error people make. So even when I give hints, a lot of times, like, watch out for backwards, just our brains are not naturally that perfect at these things. So you have to be hyper vigilant about, you know, being really careful as we go. Proactively preventing errors is probably the #1 thing on the GMAT you can do to boost your score. I have seen a student recently was like, you know, one test where they lost their focus, were more tired, was like a 585, and the next test was 715. So it can be really extreme. That's probably, you know, one of the biggest, but, you know, it can fluctuate a huge amount, especially I'd say with Focus Edition, like it can be really sensitive to some careless errors because you have a lower number of questions per section. So as the worst example, for example, I've seen most harsh example, like 2 errors dragging you down to an 80 quant. Now it really can vary. On average, it's going to be less penalty, but if you miss some easy ones, it really hurts you a lot. So, okay, back to this. Social studies on Friday, SS. Math must be scheduled 3 days before social studies. All right. So 3 days before, we got math. And then science must be scheduled 2 days after history. All right. So they have to be 2 apart. So it's essentially like science, history, right? Blank, science. So then process of elimination here, right? We couldn't have here and here, or they have to be 2 apart. So the only places that are 2 apart would be Monday, Wednesday, science 2 days after, and this should be SC. So SC here and history here. And then it would ask us something like, you know, what's on which day, what's on Tuesday, what's on Thursday in the 2 columns. So let's see here. Yeah, let's have you try this one in the poll. So I'm going to open the poll, maybe minute. Actually, let's try a little bit harder one, but I will give a hint. So let's give a hint first, but then I'll open the poll for you. So okay, so right, starting with the most strict, Paris and Milan consecutively. So the way I notate that, it's like PM, PMI, and we have Milan and Munich, so 2 M's. And then we want to connect these clues. So PMI or MIP, right, consecutively could be in two ways, like that. Then we have Copenhagen before Paris. And we also, actually, I would say, as a good rule in general, right, getting an idea of what it's looking for. So it says first and fourth out of the 5, right? They're going in order. So it's kind of like the last one where we have 5 slots. We could draw those out as well. All right. And then we want to connect these clues. So that's going to be a key. Is Copenhagen must be visited before Paris. So that's got to go, C has got to go here. And then Munich has to be after Milan. So Munich has to be here. So then we have an idea of that part. And then we have 2 more clues that you're going to have to put into account. But with those hints, let's give it a try. And then I'll open the poll here in 1 sec. And sorry, go ahead and put your answers in the poll. It took me a sec to get it up. And then if you're behind, you can put it in the private chat. Private chat's a little better. All right, so pretty good here. Yeah, a good amount of people were able to apply what we learned quite well. And we got City 1, Copenhagen, A, and then D. And just a note, there is A, B, C, D, E, F. That's intentional because on occasion, not in this question, but sometimes there can actually be 6 answers, which makes it a little bit harder for the two-part analysis. So we got C and MU. All right, let's go through it. So we have this sequence here, C first, then P or MI. We actually don't know the order, and then MU. And then we have these final 2 criteria, final 2 clues. So London is either first or last. So I didn't draw that in yet, but here we could kind of draw an arrow here, either there or there. And then London and Copenhagen cannot be visited consecutively. So we have this sequence here in this order, right? The problem now we have to kind of do process of elimination, right? London's at the start. What if London was at the start? Then Copenhagen would have to be second, and these 4 would have to go here. But with that rule, they can't be consecutive. Copenhagen cannot go here. So therefore, the London has to go at the end, right? Because London and Copenhagen can't be touching. So therefore, we put Copenhagen here first. Then we don't know for the second, these ones we can't answer, but it's either PMI or MIP. That's fine. And then we got Munich in 4th. So pretty good on that. Yeah, some out of time, but that's fine. We're just learning. So totally fine if, rush us a little bit today. Totally fine if you don't answer in time. Just you can go back later and look at it. Or and an important thing actually in general is just go back and redo any mistakes or slow or guesses. All right, so now we're looking at criteria questions. So again, these first 2 types are a bit less common, but I didn't want to show it because it is something different than you would normally see in the reading comp and critical reasoning. So criteria, we're sifting in through the information, zeroing in on what's relevant. Again, working on the strictest one or easiest one to deal with first. And then, working step by step, doing process of elimination. One note is a little bit harder on 2-part analysis, but if you are doing one at a time, you can use what I teach as the finger technique, which is super duper helpful for verbal. And if you're doing one answer at a time, sometimes the answer choices are interconnected, so it's a little harder. But essentially, this is process of elimination instead of on your pad with your hand. So I really love this. It helped me a ton when I learned it. just to like stay totally dialed in and have you feel the progress as you're doing process elimination. So it would be pinky for the first, for A. I guess, yeah, two-part analysis, if there are 6 answers, it's a little bit tougher as well. But still, you could be eliminating the first 5. And it is more common to have 5 answers. But essentially, pinky for choice A, if you're right-handed, and then going on. So like, let's say A, B, C were gone. We go like this, and we still have these 2 left. Yeah. So let me know if any questions on that. And then a note here is just being careful of the qualifier words versus extreme. So may versus must, some versus all. That's really important across verbal in general. Right? So also quant, actually, you may have a could versus a must. What could be true versus must be true. It's different. And someone asked about the technique. Yeah, I'll show one more time. So essentially, yeah. So basically, if choice A is wrong, you would pull your pinky, right? And now we only have B, C, D, E. Yeah. Yeah. So each finger, right, it stands for a possible answer. That's right. Yeah. So some people are saying a little bit difficult to control individually. That's definitely true if your hand's up, and it can take a bit of practice. But if your hands on, it's really hard to control it with your hands up. But if your hand's on the table, which I recommend, it is easier, and you can just pull it back like one knuckle. Doesn't have to be all the way necessarily. So just try what's most comfortable, but you can just pull it a little bit, like the knuckle down. That might be easier. But you're right. It can be a little tricky at first. Can take a little practice. But it is nice, if you can get it to work, I recommend it. I'd say most people it works for, but some people resist or just it's annoying at first. It does take a bit of practice, yeah. All right, so let's try this. I'll actually show here how to do it quickly. So we have some criteria here. So it has to be the highest ranked, all right, and it gives the ranks. And I might like skim at the start and see if there's an easier thing, because I kind of see here, there is this idea of below level 200, and then there's at least level 200. Numbers are going to be the easiest to deal with. So I'll probably deal with that part first, rather than the highest ranked. And then we also have this other criteria here for so it's asking for select a course without violating the requirements. So we see its criteria. We got QU here and TI here. So we could do one at a time. So for QU, has to be in the highest ranked. It says below level 200, and it says foreign region. So the number's the easiest to deal with. I would just eliminate everything higher. So the 401's gone, the 201's gone. Has to be below level 200. Actually, it would be better to eliminate here. Now, as a note, you can't actually draw on the screen. This is just to show you, but we could like use a finger technique or our pad. So that's gone. Doing one at a time, making sure we're not mixing up the columns as well. Here, here, here. And then we have this foreign region. So looking at what's left, we got either physics or civilizations of Africa. We'll go with that. All right. And then we can move on to part 2, column 2, TI. Let's see. So at least level 200. So we'll eliminate everything below. The 198's gone. The 112's gone. What else do we have? STEM subject here. And let's look. So we got literature, no. Let's see, here. Literature, no. And theater, no. So now we're left with this for Applied Math 401. And there's our answer. And it turned out on this particular question, we didn't need this info. Occasionally, you won't need all the info. So just be aware of that. One other thing that's also rare. Yeah, so actually that's a good point. So some people are saying for people in Africa, option D wouldn't be foreign. We do have to read a little careful to prove it. QU is based in the US. Yeah. So it would be considered foreign based on where it's based, but that's a good question. And then for QU, why not quantum physics? Because that's not on the foreign region. Yeah. Yeah. So great questions. Yeah. Yeah, there sometimes will be some clarifying details. I mean, it's impossible for like, this definitely can't be a foreign region. So you're right. If you're unsure about like, oh, is Africa necessarily foreign? There may be more clarifying details that's right. It says based in the US. So great questions. Yeah. And then quantum physics, yeah, that violated the foreign condition. Cool. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, people are liking the strategies so far. So thanks so much. Also, yeah, I mean, things are confusing. Tell me what you don't like too. I always like feedback. So yeah, so I do adjust the course a bit, to how people are feeling on things, in terms of pacing, etc. All right, okay, so now we're into the bulk of it. The main three formats are going to be within CR and RC skills. So you might have something like this, strength and weaken, although they do throw quite a variety. Maybe it's what's the conclusion, what's an assumption, what's the, a wide variety. So you do want to do a wide variety of questions. And yeah, as I was saying earlier, that data insights is super important, that average person scoring much lower. So you do want, a structured approach, first getting the fundamental skills, right? With strength and weaken, et cetera, all the CRRC, and then, diving deep with getting, good questions, and a variety of them. All right. Let's see. So yeah, main three formats. So we got standard would be something like this, where it's not like a completing the statement or completing the passage. Essentially, these ones, they're just blanks you're filling in. So it'd be like blank 1, blank 2, either at the bottom of the passage or like in a statement below it. And then my personal preference, generally throughout the TTP course, it tells you to read the passage first. My personal preference is actually in general to just get a sense of like, what are the columns? What is this part? But that's optional. It's a personal preference, I would say. So I like to say, okay, we know what we're looking for, strength and weaken, before I go to it, because it does adjust your approach a bit. To say it was an inference, it's a different attitude. So you'll see this a lot more in critical reasoning. But like in the STEM, some of them like both say support. It's like, right, an inference would be from above, what below is true, and a strengthen would be from what below is affecting the argument above. Yeah. And there's a comment here. Right. So someone's saying for multi-source, they like to read charts first. Right. Yeah. So it can vary in terms of what you like to read first. One thing I do teach in general on the longer question types, like a reading comp or two-part analysis, multi-source, is something I call sniping. So it's also true in maybe these questions a little bit, but is like if there are certain keywords, really making sure to go back, especially if there's a certain name, a certain date. So leaving yourself not going too overboard on timing on the first reading. Like you wouldn't, I think generally, like say some people will take 5 minutes to read, and then if it's 3 questions, it's like 20 seconds per question, or even 3 questions, right? For reading comp, you have 2 minutes per question, so 4 minutes to read, then you're only 8 seconds to evaluate each choice. So just be careful with that. Of like, it's okay at first if you need more time, but I do personally prefer leaving more time to go back and forth between the question and the passage, and sniping for the correct section, because a lot of times it will just be only like a half sentence. Like if it asks where a disagreement between X and Y, they might only disagree in like 1/2 sentence. All right, so yeah, we're actually not going to do this question, but this was just kind of an example. I'm going to show you some other ones. And then, yeah, in terms of process, right, just making sure, number one thing I think is making sure we fully understand exactly what it's asking for, and then, evaluating the choices going through it. No, actually, let's see, the answers, yeah. Sure. Actually, I haven't done this one in a while. One sec. This was just to show, yeah, the point of this one was just to show, I wasn't intending to teach this one because I have some others I want to cover. But yeah, if you want to go back to this later, you could pause if you want to answer it. And our answers are going to be this and this. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. All right. So yeah, number one key habit, make sure we fully understand what must go into each blank. And so a lot of times it will like have a variety of wording. So here it's like, if the engineer statements are true, the company has good reason to choose camera if blank is its highest priority, and choose LiDAR if blank is its highest priority. So a lot of times they'll have this if, but the question could be different. Like in terms of, there's a wide variety of like what that, what could go in there. And essentially here, like good reason to choose if blank is its highest priority, right? We might get more context here, but it's like comparing them, right? This one is, costly. This one's less expensive. This one's well in different lighting. This one's better at reading signs. So essentially it's like an advantage. So we essentially want to translate this, right? One would be an advantage of camera. Two would be an advantage of LiDAR. And essentially, it's quite common in reading comp that you'll have like, this is essentially a reading comp question where it's asking for a difference or a disagreement, but a difference between two things or a disagreement between two things. A key thing is you need concrete evidence for both sides of it. You can't just say if like one is good, if it just says camera is good at X, we can't like assume that the other one's bad. So you do have to be specific about that you have evidence on both sides of the comparison. So I guess with that I think with that in mind, I'm going to let you try this one. So please just put results into the poll or private chat if you want to change your answer. All right, 15-second warning. You can do your best here. All right, so pretty good. We had some out of time, which is fine, but we had a good amount. I think the first part was a little easier. Yeah. So we had affordability for the first part. So let's go through that. So where are they being compared? If you saw affordability, right? If you're glancing, so we can go back and forth. If we see a difference here in the passage, then maybe we look for it in the answer choices, right? And vice versa. Like if we, we can go from the answer choices back to the passage as well. some of these things like safety, right? It's like this one, there's a lot of pros and cons. So we can't say one is necessarily safer than the other. We need concrete evidence. But let's look at affordability. We said LiDAR, it's good in different lighting. We have contrast, but are costly. Okay. Then we have conversely a contrast marker. So these marker words are really important, showing contrast. We have but here, conversely here. Right. So that's the fundamental that's going to be probably the most important for being really efficient at these questions, is noticing marker words. Right. Additionally would be additional support. All right. Anyway, back to this. So we had but are costly. Conversely, these are, so it's showing contrast, less expensive. And then, but okay, so less expensive. These are costly, these are less expensive. So that's an advantage of camera. We're good there. And then let's look at, this was performing well in different lighting. So we have another advantage here. Whereas this one, performance dips at low light conditions at night. This second part's a little bit harder, but we have a direct contrast here. Good in different lighting. Bad, right? Dips means bad in low light conditions at night. So we're looking for, good versus bad, just keeping it simple with that. And then this would be performance at any hour, because, right, if this one's bad at low light conditions at night, this one's better in different lighting, then that would be implied that it is better. So it's a little bit less direct than the first part, but still concrete evidence to support it. The other ones, we definitely don't have anything on high speeds, so that's wrong. We don't have clear evidence of safety, and we don't really have navigation efficiency. This is effectively, but that's not quite the same. May not interpret the 3D environment as effectively. That's not quite the same as navigation, and it's not quite the same as efficiency. So I think we had a few people choose that. Yeah. Just be careful of, like, this might be a distortion. Yeah, so a word that's like, one I've seen on an official question was like, it had to do with time. There was like irregular intervals in either the passage or the answer choice. And then it was like temporarily, right? They both have, to do with time, but temporarily is like different than irregular intervals. So just be careful of that. Another common trap would be like more too extreme. Yeah, so like some versus all or most versus all, that kind of thing. One sec here. All right, I want to show one more here. All right, so yeah, another thing that can come up. Now this one would be complete the passage. That last one was complete the statement, it's not really that important to categorize them, but essentially, just to show here, right? This one was, there was a statement below the passage with the blanks in it. And then here, this one, the blanks are within the passage, but works very similarly. So what's one thing that's slightly different here is it could be like the two are connected. So here it's like an increase in the one can lead to a decrease in the two. So here it is more interconnected. So the answer says it is possible for the answers to depend on each other versus being separate. Yeah. And actually, sorry, I did just catch a question on the last one. The problem, yeah, someone says maybe reading signs was safety. The problem is there's multiple aspects of safety here. Yeah, so like, right, if it's not good at night, then that's a safety issue. Better at reading signs, that's a safety issue. Faltering under severe weather, that's a safety issue, and not interpreting, all four of these are safety issues. So the problem is safety is too broad, that they both have pros and cons related to safety. Yeah. So that's the problem. Yeah. You don't have a concrete answer yet. Yeah. Good question. So thanks for asking questions. All right. This one. So in terms of markers, this is really helpful. So in this final conclusion here, we have this result suggest that. So suggest that means a conclusion. This result, this word this, is called a look above marker. So meaning it's relating to something above. So like the word this is a pronoun referring to something right above it. You could also have like such a result is another one. Or you could have something like, for example, it's a little bit different, but that would be supporting something above. Anyway, this result, so we would want to know what the result is. So the result is in the prior sentence. A recent study found that the more time they spent on smartphone apps, the less time they spent on offline activities. All right. So essentially it's saying increase time. So this first variable, right, here in green, more time spent on smartphone apps, that actually fits with this, with the increase in the one. So for that, we can say, look for the answer choice, amount of time on smartphone apps. Okay, good. And then the less time they spent on the offline activities. I am shortcutting this one a little bit to just highlight the important parts. I probably, would read the whole thing, and we may have to go back up to an earlier section. But I kind of wanted to show the most important part here in terms of filling in the blank and this idea of this result. So we are able to get that first blank from these final two sentences. Now, in terms of the second blank, the less time they spend on the offline activities. All right, so that's going to fit in with this decrease in the two. All right. And it is, yeah, a decent amount of the time it will like really key in mostly on one section. So yeah, really knowing where to focus and not throughout data insights is super important. It is going to be a little harder in these versus like, say, a graph. If you know it was like June in 2004, right? You can very concretely know, look at the graph, June 2004. It is a little bit more of a mix of art and science, or it's a little bit, I mean, there's a science to it, but it is harder, in these to know exactly where to look necessarily. But this idea of like this result pointing to the sentence before, these kind of things are going to help us in terms of process. All right, so then the next part, we said that a decrease in, so that was the less time they spent on the offline activities. So we're looking for something about time decreasing in offline activities. So we look here, we got time doing enjoyable activities and time on activities that produce a weaker dopamine response. So for 2, it is going to be one of these for time. But then we have to go back to the passage, read more carefully on what would essentially these offline activities connect with. Is it enjoyable activities or is it a weaker dopamine response? So this is where we can like snipe again. Where is it talking more about offline activities? That's here. Offline activities here. Some dopamine production is triggered by offline activities. Okay, so some dopamine production is triggered by these. And then we have a contrast here. However, use of the smartphone apps results in unusually strong dopamine production. So the offline activities, it's implied. When I say implied, like direct evidence, like it doesn't say it, well, it depends on how you define the word direct, right? But there is concrete evidence that it's less because it says unusually strong versus just some dopamine production. And you have the word however showing contrast there. So even though it doesn't go as direct as to say it has less, it is reasonably inferable. And what you want to be careful of is like not reasonably inferring too far. You want, and when any sort of inference, you want it to be a minimum amount of inference versus like on that prior question, if we said one safer, that goes too far. So we need to have a concrete, be able to like prove it, being like, okay, this word shows contrast, right? And so unusually strong, like from the language, we can infer that reasonably as it must be true. So yeah, so the offline activities, it is implying less dopamine production. So then we're going to say that one is correct there. Let me know if there's any questions on that in the chat. And meanwhile, I'm going to answer this other question. Someone asked, where can we find a repository of verbal-based DI? So 2 sources. If you're taking the course, there is a 5-day trial as well. So I recommend for everyone who hasn't done that to do that. They will be, I think in the course, it does in the chapters, it'll have like, topic by topic, like we're doing today, giving you a good variety of things. And then there'll be chapter tests that actually, I think they do mix the quant and the verbal. And then the second source I always recommend is the official guides. So you can either use the advanced search on GMAT Club, or we always recommend buying the guides because it is a bit better. You can do with, if you buy the guides, there's a 4-pack for like maybe $60 on Amazon. Either the last year's guide or this year's guide is fine, but you do want either the Focus Edition ones. And it's like 1,700 questions, so there is like maybe 150 or so. Across that, I think it's something like, it might not be that many actually. It's probably like, 50 or 100, maybe 50 verbal DI, something like that. Yeah. 50, 60, something. Yeah, not don't know exact numbers. But then there's a bunch, there's probably another 50 in the around that in the TTP course. And I can vouch for the quality. I did base them off I wrote most of these verbal ones here. So I can vouch for them that they're legit, that they're inspired by real questions and follow the patterns of real questions. Yeah. Based on, but different, right? Like taking the type of wording that's in the, type of wording and then different. Yeah. So I did want to do a little review here of a very important critical reasoning topic, which is cause and effect. So this is a super important. We're going to go through 5 frameworks for how to weaken a cause and effect argument. The number 1 is going to be alternative cause. And there's other things that also imply alternative cause. And then we'll give you a question that applies this. So the number 1 thing is like they're assuming that the cause and effect is actually correct. They're assuming there's not an alternative explanation. So cause and effect, just it's pretty sketchy in general. Just to say, something happened before another thing, or there's a correlation statistically. It's sketchy. Yeah. All right, so first one here. Yeah, alternative cause. So here's an example. This is actually based on an official one. Senior citizen drivers get in fewer accidents than younger drivers. Then we can tell it's causation because it goes the reason, which is a reason would be an explanation. So you do want to learn causation markers. A few others, I'll make a note here. It's like due to, X is due to Y. Right? So this result, that's essentially saying result is caused by cause, right? Is due to, result is due to cause. Same thing with like attributed to, same idea. The word because is really common. So there's a bunch of them. Before I forget, there was another question here. Would you recommend logic-based reasoning from LSAT? Yeah, I would say as a last resort. I mean, they are good. They're a little bit different. You don't want the parallel reasoning because that it is almost never on the GMAT. So I would skip those if you're taking like practice tests. I would just skip them. They are a little bit different. They're a little bit more formal logic, although there's a tiny bit of formal logic in the 2-part analysis. I would say, I mean, there are thousands of, you got, a bunch in TTP, and then you got, if you're, there are, a few thousand official ones as well, if you're looking at old questions. So there are a lot of old questions, yeah, you can use that are good. So I would say old official ones, official GMAT ones are better first, but you can also supplement with LSAT. Some tutors recommend it. I personally prefer as a tutor to give the GMAT ones first. But if someone really went through everything, as I say, it's a little bit rare. I mean, a lot of times, like some people say that I kind of somewhat agree with, is that potentially you're not getting the most out of the huge amount of questions that are already there. If you're still, if you still need more practice. But I mean, that's not 100% true. Sometimes it just does take more practice. But I would say as a first thing, something that people are often not doing enough of is enough of review, reflect, redo. What I mean by that, that's just a mantra to remember. But a lot of people are stopping at the review step. They're like, oh, the answer was this. Okay, all right. Okay, I kind of get it. And then they're not doing enough of that next step of reflect. What can I proactively do the next time to prevent this error? And that's where, of course, coaching comes in terms of the patterns and having some frameworks of like, this is a trap because this. Definitely on verbal, it's super important to know, probably a lot of you have heard this, why the right answer is right, why the wrong answers are wrong. But like actually taking the time to think through that, and then how how you can proactively prevent that error on the next time you see something like that. So definitely like these kind of things of like, oh, I didn't recognize X is due to Y. Shoot, I like that. That's a causation problem, right? These frameworks. So like what we're covering right now, super important. It's kind of turning the verbal more into math. And then in terms of redos, super important to go back and redo those mistakes. Within the TTP platform, there is under custom tests. A lot of times people aren't doing enough of that, of going back and redoing, just trying to get through material, but it's not really worth as much if you're don't fully understand it. So super important, go back, you know, and also whatever other sources you're using, official guides. I was saying one advantage of the official guides, if you do want extra additional questions, is you can do what quote fake test using official questions at MBA.com. So what I would encourage is like you can select like 20 questions. Now the multi-source reasoning you do have to do separately. A lot of times people find that confusing in the reading comp, but you could select 20 questions, remove like instead of doing 20 including multi-source reasoning. Sorry, this is getting in a little detail. But the multi-source reasoning, it's kind of buggy. You have to do them separately, like select all the multi-source. Otherwise, it will give you only one from each passage. Same with reading comp. But this is a pretty nice technique as you can do like simulated practice tests. Same thing with TDP. I actually did one before my my highest score, the 780. I would literally every day for like a month, I did like a practice test of Quant to try and like hit like over 100 in a row on hard questions so that I knew like almost for sure going into the test, I would have a perfect 51. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so, okay, so back to this. So X is due to Y, attribute result is due to, yeah, that was just like result is due to cause, same thing attributed to, because, yeah, there's a bunch of these other ones. But in the course under the marker section, there's a list of like, you know, all the markers of all the different types, very helpful. So back to this, yeah, so it will often be worded, like it'll often be applied in terms of an assumption. And recognizing assumptions is really the core of critical reasoning. So if it says X causes Y, it's assuming there is not an alternative cause. Essentially, the way I think about it is Z did not cause Y instead. Now, we don't necessarily have to know, like if we have that framework, I call that pre-noticing. There is like debate in the course, it tells you not to pre-think. But I do think like the compromise is like to pre-notice. We don't necessarily need to predict like what the exact answer would be, because maybe there's 100 different alternative causes, but it is helpful to pre-notice, okay, this is a causation argument, and we're aware of them, you know, from the course, what are the ways that we could weaken a causation argument? We know that the most common would be an alternative cause, so these kind of things. Seniors did not drive many fewer miles. Seniors did not have better safety features. The seniors did not have better streets that reduced the risk of accidents, that kind of thing. All right, so another one is framework is reverse causation. So if it says X caused Y, right? I said on the last slide, Z caused Y would be like the first pattern. Another one would be Y caused X. So this doesn't always apply, but in certain arguments, it could be reversed. So say this one, right? This one actually doesn't make any sense. Ex-smokers have a higher death rate from lung cancer than current smokers. Well, the conclusion doesn't make sense. But we might have an explanation if we reverse the cause. So therefore, quitting smoking causes lung cancer. That doesn't really make sense. But this could actually make sense here if it was in reversed. So what if they got lung cancer first and that caused them to quit smoking? Then based on this correlation, right, the causation could actually be in reverse. They got lung cancer first, then they quit smoking. And so then the people who quit smoking actually had a higher death rate. So you can have that kind of a thing. You could have a third variable be the true cause. So actually in real life, you might have an argument like, well, let's just stick with this one to keep it moving. So here it says a correlation. It says air pollution increased and physical fitness decreased. So that's saying, oh, the air pollution up must have been the cause for people to be less fit, but maybe there's some third variable involved. So, yeah, in recent years, the use of automobiles has supplanted, taken over bicycling as the main people get around. So then that would actually be explaining both. And it wasn't necessarily the air pollution. Maybe it was the automobiles taking over bicycling, right? That caused the more pollution and also caused the less fit. Another one you might see is like some variables are correlated. So maybe there's a problem like college students, say there's a stat, right? Like married people or college students often have like college graduates often have better stats in health. Married people live longer. Therefore, getting married will make you live longer. So it's possible that's true, but we don't know because it could just be like a built-in, it could be the population is a bias. So there is this idea of like a sample bias mixed with a causation bias. So it could be an alternative explanation is the married people were healthier to begin with, and they're more likely to get married. So that kind of thing. Or college students live longer. Maybe the college students are healthier anyway. They have less problems, right, to start with. Yeah. So there's a lot of things like that. And that's why, like when you do a study, like it would need to control for a variable. Control meaning like account for, like take that into account, right? So, right when the studies are done, they have to like account for all the other variables that would throw things off. All right, so another basic framework is X, not Y. All right, so in one of our stores, we lowered prices and revenue increased. Therefore, it caused the revenue increase. Well, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. So weakener can be in our other stores, we lowered prices and revenue did not increase. So this is like, essentially you had the cause, we have the cause, but we don't have the effect, right? So this is like an X, not Y pattern. And then a fifth one could be not X and we still had Y. So in one of our stores, we lowered prices and revenue increased. Therefore, lowering prices caused the revenue increase, same thing. But then we have this in reverse. In other stores, we did not lower prices and revenue did still increased. So you had the result without the cause. That implies that there was some other cause. So let's try one question where we're going to apply some of this. Now, one note is like the question's going to ask strength and weaken, right? If we had the reverse, like if we remove an alternative cause, that would be probably the most common strengthener. Another potential strengthener, if you had not X, not Y, would strengthen. So if we didn't have the input, we didn't have the output, then, two strengtheners would be not Z, and we still had Y. We didn't have the, sorry, that's wrong. Not Z. Sorry, that's right. I'm mixing myself up sometimes. You do have to pay attention. So yeah, we could have the cause was not Z. This is a little different. So what I meant to say is the cause is not Z. That strengthens, right? It's not some alternative cause. It doesn't prove it, but it removes a weakener. Essentially a strengthener will often remove a weakener. And then the other one I said is you could have not X, not Y. That would also strengthen because we didn't have the input, we didn't have the output. And then I'm checking a question here, but it's not mentioning that lowering price is the only cause. Right. It's true. It doesn't say the only cause. Yeah, I guess maybe you're right. That's actually a decent feedback that was the cause. It'll often be worded like this, the cause, like implying that it's the main cause. But it doesn't say only. It won't always say only, but it could just say caused. And I mean, it won't always say only. So one thing to note is a weakener won't necessarily completely destroy it. Yeah, so this just weakens it. It implies that there could have been another cause for it, but it's not airtight. Yeah, so that's an important thing is a strength and weaken question, it doesn't have to totally completely destroy the argument. It just has to, in a significant way, or a subtle way potentially, but in some significant, some clear way, weaken. Yeah. All right. All right, let's have you try this one. And then we'll open, you can think if you finish early, you can think if you have any questions. I'll stay maybe another couple extra minutes to take any general questions. So let's do like push you on the time a little bit here because we had some clues. All right, so I'll let the submission go through another 6 seconds. So not bad for the people that answered. Definitely a bunch out of time, which is fine. But let's go through the logic. So the answer here was A and then C. So a key thing here, I like to start with this. Argument would have the most support if X is true and Y is false. So that's another way of saying strength and weaken. Again, it can throw a wide variety at you. So that's why we, you do want a lot of practice. So most support if X is true. So X is true, it would support the argument, right? So that's a strengthen. So this is strengthen. And it would be supported if Y is false. Essentially, that Y would essentially weaken it, right? So it's just a different way of saying weaken. All right. Now, looking at the argument, there is going to be language here showing causation. I mean, I did prompt you, prime you in advance, which definitely helps. But right, they do have this marker word here. This increase can be attributed to. So this is common that the structure of it will have some result, right? This happened. The profits increased by 55%. And then it says this increase, the cause of it was the CEO's tremendous leadership, which have been celebrated. Okay. So one note is we don't try to argue with like the premise. This have been celebrated by employees and investors. Normally, we're not trying to weaken the premise. We're trying to weaken the assumption, or essentially we have to address the assumption between the premise and the conclusion, which most likely is some sort of alternative cause and related to that. So to strengthen, right, a potential weakener would be, oh no, it was actually the economy. Like, the economy, other companies, yeah, well, there's a couple ways to weaken, but if the economy did, was twice as strong, right, then 55% profit maybe wouldn't be so good. So strengthen it saying there was not a significant change to the economy, meaning it's implying that that was actually not the cause. The economy was not the cause, which would strengthen that the CEO was the cause. Then this one would be essentially the competitors also had, they didn't have this same new CEO, right? So it's essentially not X, still Y pattern. Not X, still Y. So yeah, if essentially you don't have the same input of this new special CEO and you still have the dramatic profit increases, it's kind of like the opposite of A. It's kind of potentially it's, you know, economic conditions or some other conditions outside of the CEO is the alternative cause it's implying. So yeah, not bad there. The other answer choices are on the wrong track of this. It helps to have this framework of like alternative cause, because this is just adding more additional explanation. The conclusion was about the causation. The conclusion was not, so it's super important as a first step to find the conclusion. The conclusion is saying, right, the cause is the CEO. This is just adding additional explanation on why the CEO was chosen. That's not what we're trying to support or weaken. This one, also about the CEO, is just saying it received less recognition. It seems to be like arguing with this premise, and we have to accept premises as true. So it says that he's been celebrated. We don't argue with that premise. That's a fact. That's treated as a fact here. That's the support. So we treat that as fact. The skills have been celebrated. It's possible the person received less recognition than some other CEOs. And so even if, I mean, even if this was the conclusion, this doesn't totally destroy it, because, you know, it's possible that you could have less recognition and still be celebrated. Yeah, but I mean, that's not really the point. The point is that we need to be focused on the tie between the cause and the effect. And this one, right, is just, this is also arguing with the premise. So a lot of these traps are arguing with premises, right? Costs also increase. This would potentially be a weakener for a different conclusion. So if you have, since, this is an important framework, since revenues increased, profits increased. So there's a third variable that's not being accounted for. If that's our conclusion, right, it's assuming that costs did not increase. So this, as you're going through wrong answer choices, a helpful thing can be like, what would a different conclusion be that this would be a good weakener for, right? This would be a good weakener for this kind of a conclusion. And in the course, we go more into this about the idea of a malicious variable, but it's quite often that there's like 3 variables involved in an equation. So there is some kind of math quant type framework going on in critical reasoning, and they're not accounting for that other variable. Another one could be like a rate. So since flights decreased, passengers decreased, well, there's a third variable there. You actually are missing, right? This one's talking about flights. This one's talking about passengers. But the equation would actually be flights times passengers per flight, right? Per flight equals passengers. So essentially it's saying since this went down, this is a really, really important thing, then this went down. But what if passengers per flight went up, right? So that it's assuming that this did not increase. Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for everyone's feedback. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, so we'll stop there on questions, but I can go a couple more minutes if there are any other general questions. That's my passion, so sometimes I will go a little over. Somebody says tips to manage time. Yeah. So one thing is actually letting questions go, because especially on Focus Edition, you can go back and change 3 questions with any extra time. So what I recommend is you see something that looks really hard and confusing. It's a little bit harder to tell on verbal, but like say on Quant, it's like a Quant-ish problem or a criteria problem that looks extremely complex. You might just flag it and come back to it at the end. You do want to get the lower hanging fruit. So with Focus Edition, that's less stress. On the old edition, right, you couldn't come back to the questions. Definitely take advantage of that. So one nice thing is in the custom tests and TTP, that's one thing it doesn't actually have in the MBA.com that I wish it did have, is with the TTP ones, you can like use section review when you do a custom test and use that to go back and review questions. you'd have to kind of like fake it if you were doing like the fake tests with the official questions. You'd kind of have to like just use any extra time to go back and try them again. So you could like kind of fake it that part again. But nice thing with the interface is it does have like the flagging and everything in the TTP, so that's really nice. Let's see, time management. I mean, the biggest part is just like getting really fluent on all the skills, right? If you have these frameworks, like I would answer this extremely fast because I see, oh, it's causation. We're looking for these frameworks. I see this attributed to, so I make it like a math problem, right? And like if you're super fluent on math, say the average time is 3 minutes, it might take me like 1 or 2 minutes, right? So depending on the problem, but like if you're, expert level, you're going to be able to do things like twice, just based on your knowledge and skill, about twice as fast. However, even at my expert skill level, just be aware the GMAT can throw some weird things at you, or just like, oh, that looks hard. You know what? I'm going to come back to it. The other thing is your brain can potentially process it a little bit in the background. All right. Next question was remaining days. Exam in 25 days. All right. This person was already scoring quite high, so that's good. Yeah. So say the last 25 days, if you're in the this person's at already what's like 96th percentile. So I mean, I think at that point, it's clear that your knowledge is solid. So you can definitely hit any weak points, but I would say practice tests. Nice thing is if you buy, I always recommend people buy the test 3 through 6, the official tests, and you can retake them without getting any repeat questions, which is awesome. The first and second test, you'll sometimes see repeats on the next retake, especially to take them more, but those can be taken unlimited times versus the 3 through 6. When you buy them once, you can take them twice. But essentially, at minimum, that's 10 practice tests without any repeats. So I generally recommend people take at least one as kind of a diagnostic early on. Then potentially after they've done a lot of prep, gone through the course, taking another to see where they're at. And then if you are scoring quite high like this student is, then taking definitely more practice tests. Leading up the day before, lots of flashcarding I recommend. Definitely lots of that review, reflect, redo that I was talking about. So yeah, review, reflect, review, reflect, redo mantra of a lot of times people haven't done nearly enough of redoing their mistakes. Yeah. Let's say there was one last question here. Let's take that and then stop. Any improvements on data sufficiency? Yeah. So a big thing is for data sufficiency is being aware of the traps, but essentially you don't necessarily have to solve. So you need to be aware of certain traps, but let me see. I think we could take a peek here. So actually the first session, like this Wednesday, if you do sign up for the course, we'll be doing more on this. It'd be awesome to see you there. So first session is data sufficiency, but I will give a little preview here. Essentially, yeah, a key habit I've written here on the right. Let's see, actually, I think this page is better. Yeah. So, I mean, some of it's practice, of course, and a huge step, actually, before even this, you do want to rephrase. So you do need to rephrase like the stem to like get what it's asking for. So if it's in algebra, like, let's see, here's one I wrote, I think, let's see. Something like this. You do want to translate everything, right? So you want to take all this and turning it into algebra and then like get what it's asking for. So sometimes like say it asks the ratio of x to y, you would want to know like x over y. And then there are traps of like, this is called a combo. It's asking for the two variables, right? Combined. So if you had like 3x equals 2y, you want to be able to see immediately that this is sufficient. Because essentially this is giving us a ratio, right? If we could get x over y by itself, and that would be sufficient. If we had something adding together like 3 x plus y, or x equals, let's see, x equals y plus 3, this is going to not be sufficient. This will be sufficient. This will be insufficient. because this is giving us the combo of the two variables combined. This one is not. So that's the kind of thing you got to be aware of. There are a variety of different combos. It could be adding, subtracting, that kind of thing. A super huge key step is, rephrasing this into the variables. This one will turn out to be some sort of a combo. And then when you plug in, the variable falls out. Essentially, you get two birds with one stone. Back to this idea is we often don't need to actually solve. We just need to know that we can answer. So like with two unique linear equations, two variables, we can solve. But you might be able to solve with only one equation, like I just showed you. Sometimes the equations could be, look different, but actually be the same. So in the course, it goes through these kind of equation traps. And it can get, more complex in terms of the translation, right? You do have to get good at that translation. And then, of course, quadratics is a little different. If you have like an x squared, then you'd have two answers for that. Yeah. Next session. So normally I do like one of these before each live teach. So it's every like 2.5 months just for the preview of the live teach. It's like usually the week or two before I teach a new cohort. So yeah, the cohort starts Wednesday. As a reminder, let's drop the link in there. That starts Mondays and Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern, for 10 weeks, starting this Wednesday, August 8th. And then one last question, I guess, if people are low on those official practice tests, yeah, if you're not low, then just, try to conserve them until you are close to your goal score, right? So you want to take them as you are, as close as possible to your goal score, or, at or above. So, you do want to take more time in between them if you're significantly below your goal score. But if you are low on those tests, then I would say the fake tests, either on the custom tests of TTP or also like the MBA.com fake tests. I did both. And that's probably a good stopping point here because we're 12 minutes over. But thanks so much for all the awesome questions and showing up here on a Sunday. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you guys again. I would love to see you in the live teach. And if not, then another time. Yeah, and wishing you the very best on your prep. Yeah, have a great rest of your Sunday. And thanks again.